Hello, welcome to my channel Dharma Makes. Welcome to this Halloween video. This time I made a creepy glowing jar. I was walking through the store and of course they have Halloween decorations for sale. And I saw this skeleton ghost ghoul and the whole thing just looks thrown together and very inspired, but the skull was a really nice mold. It was very expressive and evil looking, and I thought I could use this empty gem jar to make sort of a light with it. So first thing I'm doing is disassembling this thing into its parts. First, I'm just tearing off the cloth. It's all attached with hot glue, so I'm using my scissors as well for the bits that didn't want to detach. And I'm just getting rid of the globs of glue and stuff. The hands were attached to this wire piece. They had a hole going through them, and I'm just cleaning them up from all the glue residue. In the end, I'm left with this really cool plastic skull and the hands and a bunch of creepy cloth. Of course, it has a lot of flashing, those molding lines from injecting the plastic into the mold. So I'm just using a sharp blade and a nail file to get rid of them. Then I'm preparing the jar. There was some condensation inside, although I washed this with warm soap and water. There is no gem residue. And to remove the label, I used a little bit of acetone just to loosen up that glue, and I'm also using a knife to scrape off the paper, and it came off pretty easily this time. So now I'm sort of figuring out how I want to use this. I knew I wanted to use the skull. I didn't know what I was going to do with the creepy cloth. That denser material I think it was going to block too much light if I used it on the body of the jar. So instead I'm going to use this almost fishnet looking thing to wrap the jar itself in, but I really didn't like the color. So I didn't like the red and white color of that fishnet cloth, so I made a watery mixture of black acrylic paint and I literally just dyeing it. And yes, this was very messy and I had to run and wash my hands, but it was successful. It completely stained the cloth black. And now I'm just stretching it out to dry. And as a primer, I'm also painting a layer of black acrylic paint on the lid. Okay, so this skull already came painted a little bit, but whatever paint they used was super flaky, so that's why I was removing the bigger bits from the eye sockets, and I'm going to repaint it so it's mine. I'm basing it into this dark tan color first of all as a base layer, and I'm also doing it to the hands. Although the hands are not actually skeleton hands, they seem to have flesh on them, but they're creepy hands and I guess they will work. So while those are drying, I am making a mixture of PVA glue and this really transparent golden yellow paint. And what I'm going to do is to apply and press in the stained creepy cloth from before. Now this mixture of PVA glue and acrylic paint is going to have the effect of stained glass on the jar, because the paint that I used is transparent and PVA glue dries clear. It's actually gonna have this sort of slightly cloudy but transparent and stained look. At least I was really crossing my fingers and hoping that it would work. But thankfully, my instincts were on point this time. And what I'm doing is really working it in so that it lays flat. And I'm also using the same mixture to add some of this denser cloth on the lid, sort of like embracing the jarness of the jar instead of fighting against it. Of course, the skull and hands meanwhile dried, so I'm using this bone white to overbrush basically the entire thing. But as you can see, it was really worth basing it with that dark tan, because all of those nooks and crannies now are darker. And the body of the jar has fully dried overnight, and I'm just cutting off the excess right at the top. And you will see in a second that the stained glass effect is actually successful, and it has this really awesome texture everywhere. I'm also trimming the fabric that I attached to the lid so that it's kind of round, and I'm also fraying that fabric a little bit more and just trimming and arranging so that it looks right to me. And here I have a little battery Tealight, and this is the effect that I was going for. Okay, so I wanted to apply a little bit of this coppery metallic paint to the whole thing. It's a little bit darker, like more orangey than the yellow, and I think it really works well, makes it more interesting. Now I'm making a wash with shellac ink and brown acrylic paint, and I'm going to be staining the hands and the skull, and all of that will flow into the pretty good shape. The molding on these plastic pieces was actually pretty good, and it just makes it look dirty, decayed, and aged, and I really like that look. And as you can see, I'm just applying it all over the place and then letting this to dry for quite a few hours, because the wash is so liquidy. Well, for it to flow well, that's necessary. But yeah, I'm really happy with the outcome. While that was drying, I decided I needed something more, and I'm just adding this little scrap of lace ribbon around the perimeter of the jar. I'm just using hot glue to apply it. It was a yellow lace ribbon. and I think it matched quite well. And as I said, it made the jar look more like an old preserved jar, but preserving something creepy, probably. And I'm also attaching the skull right to the lid and the hands right under the brim. I'm using generous amounts of hot glue to do this. But we're not done, because I want to have sort of like the impression that the hands aren't just like stuck on, rather that they are somehow emerging from the jar. So I'm just using some white rocks, and I'm just putting on bits of hot glue and then pressing them in, sort of in and around the hands and around the base of the skull, filling in the gaps and hiding any of the hot glue overspill that might have been visible before. The rocks that I'm using are these stark white color, but that's not a problem. I'm going to be painting them after they are all set. And the skull had a hole right in the top of its head, so I've also created this cluster of rocks to hide that hole. Now I'm using some straight up black acrylic paint to paint inside of the eye sockets and the nostrils. I think that really needed to look more like holes. And I'm also just gently dry brushing in and around the contours of the bone structure for some shading, and going over that lace ribbon a little bit just to darken it. I'm also using the leftover wash from before on the rocks, and I still had a little bit of black paint on the same brush, and I think this created a really good look with that dark wash flowing between the rocks and also staining the surface. And it actually dripped down on some portions of the jar, bringing it even a little bit more dimension. When that has dried, I am using some more of that copper acrylic paint and a finer brush just to go over the exposed sides of those rocks. The wash from before still matters, because that's in the nooks and crannies between the rocks, but the exposed surfaces, they get painted. And I think this has the effect of tying the whole piece together. I may have applied a little bit here and there on the skull as well. And there it is. Now the lid and the jar can be reunited. Of course, let's not forget about the Tealight. And this is what we got. I think it can be a very atmospheric Halloween home decor piece. And, for those who enjoy the gothic, it can even function like a creepy little nightlight. I like how spooky this came out, and although I did purchase stuff to make it, I still consider it a little bit of an upcycle project, considering the jam jar. And I still have a bunch of that creepy cloth left over to use on other projects. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you're enjoying my Halloween series. Please do let me know in the comments below which one of the Halloween makes has been your favorite so far. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please go to my channel. I have made a series of Halloween themed crafts and DIYs. If this is something you enjoy, please consider subscribing to my channel, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this creepy jar. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.